Welcome to ASEAN People Speak Season 2. I am Regine Jessica Buell, your host for this podcast. To continue our discussion on the state of human rights protection in ASEAN, we will be joined by a distinguished guest that has served in Indonesia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a very long time. He shall be sharing with us his learnings and the government sector's perspective from the inception of ASEAN to the creation of the ASEAN Charter. He is currently the Executive Director of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, or ASEAN-IPR. Previously, he was the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of Netherlands and Permanent Representative to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons from 2016 to 2020. He was an ASEAN Senior Officials Meeting Leader of Indonesia and Director General for ASEAN Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He also served as High-Level Task Force Indonesia on ASEAN Community Post-2015 Vision from 2012 to 2016. He also served as an Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Indonesia to the Republic of Austria and Republic of Slovenia, while concurrently the permanent representative to the United Nations and other international organizations in Vienna from 2010 to 2012. In 2006, he served as the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Indonesia to the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and other international organizations in Geneva. From 2002 to 2006, he was the Director for Human Rights in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. In addition, our guest speaker also served as Vice Chairperson of the Conference of State Parties Chemical Weapons Convention from 2017 to 2018. He was also the Governor of Indonesia to the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors in 2011 to 2012, and the Indonesian Sherpa for the Nuclear Security Summit in 2012. He was the President of the Intergovernment Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore in the World Intellectual Property Organization, and a member of the Indonesian negotiators for the Aceh Peace Agreement from 2000 to 2005. Everyone, let us welcome and give a round of applause to our distinguished guest for tonight, Mr. Puja. Good evening, Mr. Puja. It's nice to see you tonight.
Good evening. A pleasure to meet you. Mabuhay.
Mabuhay, mabuhay. How are you and how's everything there in Indonesia?
Wow, we are doing fine and we are so in good mood. COVID is decreasing now, so we live somewhat in the normalcy recently. So although we are still wearing masks in every moment, just a precaution.
Yes, that's wonderful to know, Mr. Puja. Actually, here in the Philippines too, we have somehow normalized some things already, but we still do wear some masks. Although recently we just found out that wearing masks is now an option when you're outdoors. Anyway, we are happy to have you with us tonight, Mr. Puja, and since we are now at our second season, we are now familiar with the present-day ASEAN. We would like to know more, though. How was ASEAN in the beginning? And how did ASEAN come about? Are there any factors or triggers or events that urge the countries or the members of the ASEAN to come together and create it and eventually sustain it?
Well, as you are fully aware, the ASEAN creations in 1967 is not something out of the blue, because preceding the establishment of ASEAN, you recall that before there was an association of South East Asia. It's called ASA, which established in 1961. It was not so successful. Then Mapilindo was established in 1963. Was not something successful in terms of the regional organization. However, as we are fully aware that ASEAN was established in 1967 in the midst of suspicions. It's not only among the members of neighboring countries here in our region, but also because of the rivalry between the superpower, you know, that time. So while the level of distrust was so high at that time, the leaders, the founding fathers of ASEAN, managed to bring together the 5 members of ASEAN, the founding fathers of ASEAN, to sit together and to come with a very solid commitment to create peace, stability in ASEAN, which in the future it is of course the goals to bring prosperity to the ASEAN. So this is something that we look at a successful story of ASEAN from 5 members becoming 6 and then becoming 9 and then complete 10 later on. So, you see that's the change from, or the shift from distrust to a geographical trust, a geopolitical trust is very, very monumental in ASEAN. So we like it or not, but we have to have a common views and commitment to maintain peace, stability, and prosperity in our regions. Nothing else.
So you mentioned, Mr. Puja, a while ago, the difficulties that started when ASEAN was being created, and you mentioned the geopolitical issues that are surrounding the different members. But looking at it now, as someone who worked in the government at that time, was there a difference between the state of the members and human rights in the region before eventually when ASEAN Charter was also created? How would you be able to compare that to how it is right now?
Well, you look at the development of ASEAN from organization which promote cooperations, then become organization which respect rule of law. This, of course, including human rights. Indeed, from the perspective of the development of human rights, and I'm so proud to tell and to share with you that I am also involved very much in the activities of the working group of the human rights mechanism since early 2000s. You were not born yet, probably that time. So we are discussing so many things with regard to the human rights issues in our regions within the working group of human rights mechanism. Without any prejudice, and we discussed this in a very, very frank manner, with the objective indeed to establish later on the ASEAN human rights body within ASEAN. And then, of course, this is not something new for ASEAN, because the word of human rights, if we recall it back to the official statements of ASEAN, we look at since 1978. I would recall that in the joint declaration of the ASEAN EC Ministerial Meeting, Brussels, in November 1978, the reference of human rights has been there. If I may say that in this joint declaration, it's mentioned that they also agree that this cooperation should serve their people by promoting greater prosperity, social justice, and human rights. Look at back in 1978. Even ASEAN
Way back in 1978, yes.
already put reference on human rights. And then, of course, when we look at the preparations of the Human Rights Conference in Vienna in 1993, in 1991, ASEAN already refrains on very strong words on human rights. For example, if you look at the joint communique of ASEAN Ministerial Meeting Kuala Lumpur in 1991, it is mentioned that they agreed that while human rights is a universal in character, implementation in the national context should remain within the competence and responsibility of each country, having regard for the complex variety of economic, social, and cultural realities. So this is even prior to the Human Rights Conference, in which they adopted the Vienna Declaration and Plan of Action in June 1993. And what the ASEAN ministers said after the Human Rights Conference in Vienna in June 1993, even they have a very, very strong commitment on human rights, how they wish to address human rights, because even in the joint communique of the 26th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting in Singapore in July 1993, they put protection first before the promotion. So this is something that we recognize as a starting point, how human rights was actually embraced within the ASEAN community and ASEAN leaders. I have my ASEAN Charter.
You have your ASEAN Charter then, yes.
And I tried to look at back again how the ASEAN Charter was
created,
developed and discussed very, very interestingly indeed, especially when you look at the book by Ambassador Tomiko. He actually reflected what happened during the high-level task force discussion in preparing the ASEAN Charter, and in particular on the discussion on the ASEAN Human Rights Body, in which and then in the ASEAN Charter under item 14. So the discussion was so interesting, was so delicate, and this is not something that we perceive of something that's very, very smooth, because you recall that even during the discussion on the ASEAN Charter, in particular on the human rights body, the member countries of ASEAN were split actually into
Yes,
two.
actually, I was going to ask you about that, Mr. Puja. We understand that there were certain sectors, or the members had different groups, so they all had different perspectives in terms of human rights. And probably their principle on non-intervention also went in the way. How was that resolved then, or how were the members of the ASEAN able to, find a common ground so that an ASEAN Charter will be created, particularly Chapter 14 on ASEAN Human Rights Body?
Yes, you see that the discussion during the meeting of high-level task force since January 2007 until the adoption of the ASEAN Charter in November 2007. It was very, very delicate and very, very difficult indeed. Even I read the interesting story about Ambassador Rosario Manalo. So because of so intense negotiation, she went to a men's room because it was so.
So were you there, Ambassador? Were you there when that happened?
It was interesting to read all those story of how the issue of human rights was brought into the discussion
Charter.
of the Charter. So that's the kind of illustrations how tense and how difficult the negotiations. And even if I look at the statement of the ASEAN leaders during this time, it was expressed also that ASEAN should view human rights in a positive light and not adopt a defensive attitude. So what does it mean? So I believe the ASEAN leaders that time already look at so progressively on human rights issues, even though countries basically was split into
different
2 or 3
factions.
groups.
Yes.
Then with a good faith, eventually they come up with a consensus language, as we can see it in the Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter. Although I believe this is not something that the highest objective that we achieve, but this is what ASEAN, at least
it was the best that they could come up with at that time.
We can write the consensus and bring everybody on the wagons, no one left behind. I think this is the spirit of bringing ASEAN members together. And certainly within the human rights perspective, this is something we understand. This is a work in progress. This is not an event. This is a process indeed. And now with ASEAN embrace the principle of rule of law, and we hope that in the future that we can catch up at this level on how we embrace human rights in totality.
That's a very nice insight that you mentioned, Mr. Puja. And I guess I want to connect this with what you mentioned a while ago. You said that with the vision of the members, considering the difficulties in terms of the different factions of the member states, they were still able to come up with a vision of how human rights should be in the region. Now, you mentioned a while ago that they chose, or at least it was written, that protection first before promotion. I'd like to ask you regarding that. When you mentioned protection of human rights first before promotion, is that, for me, that is very significant. What are your insights regarding that, Mr. Puja?
On the occasion of the 15th summit in Thailand in October 2009, the ASEAN leaders adopted Cha Am Hua Hin declarations on Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, and the paragraph 7 of the declarations made reference on protection first and promotions of human rights. And that's why I said, even in 2009, our leaders already put protection first and before the promotion. And I believe this is not a coincidence. This is by
Yes.
design to put
Yes.
protection first and promotion. So now after 2009, I believe protections be given opportunity to be put forward by all of us in these regions to keep the spirit of protection and promotion of human rights moving forward.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful insight, Mr. Puja. We certainly learned a lot from how it was developed from promotion and protection, eventually to adopting it to a protection and promotion. So we appreciate you and your thoughts regarding that. Now, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Puja, since we mentioned this already a while ago, but I'd like to circle back to the topic on what were the significant barriers in creating the ASEAN Charter. We mentioned a while ago about the different factions of the member states, but do you think that's still present now? If ever, if these barriers are still present, are they being overcome? You mentioned also a while ago that human rights is a process. It's progressing. It's not necessarily a certain event that when the ASEAN Charter was created, that was it. It is a continuing process. So may we know your thoughts regarding that, Mr. Puja?
Well, if we look at the ASEAN Charter, this is actually ASEAN Charter is an instrument with far more gravitas than prior instruments, and the ASEAN Charter actually serve as a legal and institutional framework for ASEAN. We depart from this perspective that ASEAN Charter serves as a legal and institutional framework for ASEAN. Indeed, in the future, we have to manage to overcome whatever the barriers which I believe even from the very beginning of the establishment of ASEAN, and then also in the ASEAN Charter, that the basic concern, the basic hindrance for achieving the human rights and promotion and protection of human rights. First, what I see is the actual ability of the member of ASEAN to maintain peace, stability, and prosperity of the region and its people. So that's the first barrier if we look at in the more general perspective. If we cannot maintain our peace, stability, security, and prosperity of the people, so we cannot guarantee that protection and promotion of human rights can be granted in the future.
But I'd like to think, Mr. Puja, there is, I mean, given the trust and confidence are now the issues in ASEAN right now among the member states, do you feel though that there is hope that these barriers could be overcome?
Well, you see, of 55 years of the ASEAN development, this is not something that we experience a linear development. We comes with ups and downs. We experience with sometimes with such a roller coaster.
Yes, especially with how member states deal with each other.
Right. You mentioned you name it's about the border, it's about the
Geopolitical
calamity,
issues, yes,
political issues,
colonization, yes.
rivalries, South China Sea, you name them. So there is no always easy consensus, to be brought on the table. But that's the reality that we, the ASEAN leaders, managed to come up with the consensus and create a conducive atmosphere in which we all together in the same room and the same table as a family. So this is very, very important for us to continue this spirit of maintaining peace, stability, prosperity, security, and respecting human rights in our regions. So I believe we still have the opportunity to reach these goals again, and indeed by respecting each other and promoting again the ASEAN centrality and ASEAN unity is very, very important in this current challenging circumstances in our region.
Wow. All right. And because of that, Mr. Puja, on that note, I guess we would have to wrap it all up now and say thank you for your time. It was very nice that towards the end of your message, you were saying that that there is hope and that we should still member states are working towards that vision of having that kind of ASEAN again. So on that note, I guess Mr. Puja, we would like to ask, maybe before we say goodbye to our listeners today, would you want to promote any of your social media accounts, websites, organizations, any publications or upcoming projects?
Well, we are always inspired by the ASEAN anthem. We dare to dream, we care to share. So I hope that this opportunity also is opportunity for sharing our goals, especially with regard to the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliations. Indeed, we embrace a motto, forging and fostering peace for our regions this year.
Thank you for that, Mr. Puja. And I guess before we say goodbye to our listeners, I'd like to highlight what you said a while ago, that your motto or our motto as an ASEAN is that we dare to dream and we care to share. And I guess this is also in line with what you mentioned a while ago and the ASEAN theme for 2022, which is forging and fostering peace among the member states. Is that correct? Did I
Yes.
get it? Did I get it right? So
Perfect.
yes, and considering the challenges that we are facing, it's nice to know that everyone is doing it's everyone's efforts to address the challenges together and to forge and to foster peace in the region. On that note, I guess I just want to say thank you again to Ambassador Puja for your time today. We learned a lot from you. Your insights and your reflections really do mean a lot, and we appreciate you sharing your time and your experiences and your thoughts with us. Join us again next week, listeners, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Spotify so you never miss an episode. Also, subscribe to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel at WG ASEAN HR MEC and visit our website at ASEANHRMEC.org. Thank you all again for listening, and this has been your host, Regine Jessica Buell, for ASEAN People Speak Season 2.